hand over to Owen.
Friends, firstly I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here today, not least to be on a panel. You've heard the most important voices so far. These are voices telling us the reality of what happens when ordinary people, working people, disabled people, unemployed people are made to pay for a crisis they had absolutely nothing to do with. And these are voices airbrushed out of existence by our media and by the political elite. And there's one thing we can do, and one thing actually the People's Assembly can do, is give a platform to these voices in every way we can, so the reality of what is happening to this country can be heard as loudly as possible. But friends, I also want to say, it's always inspiring to be in a room where there's just so many people who've turned up, where they're not just part of the biggest party in the country, which is the yelling at the TV every time George Osborne appears party, which I'll level with you, is a pretty big damn party. But nonetheless, you've come here because you don't want to just be angry anymore. You don't just want to yell at the television. You actually want to say, well, actually, I'm going to stand with other people who are facing the same thing as me. I'm going to fight back. And I think a lot of what this is about is we're asking, what sort of country do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a country where the only industry booming are food banks, which trebled last year? Where, as Save the Children reported, a world which most journalists and politicians have no interest in, where parents are choosing between heating their homes and feeding their kids, where you've got mums and dads skipping hot meals to make sure their sons and daughters are fed, where, as was revealed last year, the size of school lunch portions is shrinking because of cuts to education, where breakfast clubs are being scrapped. This is the 7th richest country on the face of the earth, and apparently we can no longer afford to feed our poorest children. That is the reality of austerity Britain. Do we want to live in a country where, even as people are struggling, each year the wealth of the top 1,000 people is booming, as the Sunday Times Rich List has shown? Just the increase in the wealth of the top 1,000 people since Lehman Brothers came crashing down is bigger than the entire annual deficit in this country. Do we want to live in a country where in-work and out-of-work benefits are scrapped, making working people and disabled people and unemployed people pay for this crisis? And where the desperation for work is so great that when cost it doesn't matter how angry people get, it doesn't matter how scared people get, without hope, people don't fight back. People accept what's been done to them. They might yell at their television. They might turn their anger against the neighbour, but they won't fight back. And that is what the People's Assembly has to do. It has to give people hope. And part of that is a coherent alternative to what's been happening. Because what's been battered into people's head is this idea there is no alternative from day one. So I just want to talk quickly about some of the things I think we should be saying as a movement. Now they say welfare spending's too high, and this might shock some of you, but they've got a point. Not to do with a bunch of lazy scroungers dribbling on sofas all day, watching Jeremy Kyle on repeat in mansions made out of widescreen television sets. It's for three things. It's a housing crisis, a low wages crisis, and a jobs crisis. Now people have absolutely every reason to be furious about the £23 billion of taxpayers' money being wasted on housing benefit. That's not lining the pockets of tenants. It's lining the pockets of private landlords charging extortionate rents because they know you and me, the taxpayer, will step in. And as well as controlling rents, this is what we have to be arguing for: to let councils borrow to build houses, creating jobs, stimulating the economy, bringing down the 5 million strong social housing waiting list, and also bringing down the housing benefit bill. Tax credits. Now tax credits are a lifeline for millions of people in this country. But let's be clear about what they are. They're a subsidy for low pay because bosses aren't paying their workers properly. If we had a living wage, we bring down the billions being spent on tax credits as well as housing benefit, because 93% of new claimants are people in work, as well as all sorts of other in-work benefits. And in terms of billions of pounds we're spending on unemployment, if you like. Instead of that, we should be arguing for an industrial strategy like they've had in Germany, where you create hundreds of thousands of jobs in renewable energy, taking on the environmental crisis and taking on the jobs crisis too. At the same time with the banks, we should be saying this: we, the taxpayer, bail out those banks. What control do we have over what they do? We should be arguing for proper nationalisation, that they should be accountable to us, the people who bailed them out, and have a public investment bank which will rebuild the economy. And we hear about benefit fraud day in and day out. I'll be honest, it does exist. According to the government's own figures, it's less than 1%. 1% of welfare spending, about £1.2 billion a year. Compare that to tax avoidance by the people at the top. £25 billion every single year, because the likes of Amazon, Google, M&S, as it turns out, refuse to pay their taxes. The likes of Sir Philip Green. Now, Sir Philip Green, he wasn't attacked by David Cameron like Jimmy Carr for being morally disgraceful or whatever he was attacked as. Sir Philip Green registered his company under his wife's name in Monaco, so he doesn't have to pay any taxes. He wasn't attacked, he was appointed by this government as an advisor on how to cut our public services. So friends, we need to be arguing for an all-out assault, an all-out attack on the people at the top who will not pay their taxes, and also to demand they pay more. One of the most popular policies of the last government was the 50p tax. Even a majority of Tories opposed scrapping that tax. Friends, these are all pretty common sense ideas. These are ideas which mean instead of people who had nothing to do with this crisis being made to pay for it, that instead we will rebuild this country, we will rebuild our communities, and we will make those at the top who are booming like they have never boomed at all actually cough up. And that is where this People's Assembly comes in. And it's not just, some of you must have heard it go, oh, here we go again. How many times has something like this been attempted? But friends, it's different. What this is bringing together a unique, broad coalition of people. Unions representing millions of private sector and public sector workers. People, whether they be in the Greens or the Labour Party, but crucially people with no political home whatsoever. People part of that biggest party, the yelling at the telly party. People who've been campaigning for disabled people, for young people, for tax justice. This is building a coalition, to coin a phrase, of other than the people at the top, the people who are all in this together. That is what the People's Assembly must do. And we have a responsibility to do this. It's been 5 years nearly now since Lehman Brothers came crashing down. Each year now, for the last few years, ordinary working people have faced the biggest squeeze in their living standards since my gran was born in the early 1920s.